Hello, Dr. Bill Lawler, chiropractor, kids and families, Alpine, Utah. We're going to talk today about vaccinations. So it's a controversial subject. We're going to go back to the beginning. I'm not going to talk about everything. I'm going to have probably somewhere between a 20 to 30 minute discussion. Would welcome your comments and input and questions you would have for the future. Going to focus mostly on just what are the ingredients in vaccines. And the way I found it was actually looking at the CDC website, and I'll give you another way to look, something called VaxCal, which you can look up your own child based on his or her age, weight, etc. It'll tell you what the choices are and what the ingredients are. We'll get to that in a little bit. First though, we're going to talk about vaccinations and just look at a general overview of what the ingredients are. I'm going to listen to about a 10-minute testimony of Dr. Lawrence Milevsky, who is a MD, a pediatrician in Manhattan. I actually was able to take a course from him, very much enjoyed it, and he testified in front of Congress. He just has a very clear voice. It's not fear-based, it's just informational, and that's what this whole presentation is about. The idea behind what I'm trying to do today, and I've been doing this now for 40 years, that's how old our oldest child is. Yes, I had her when I was 10. So it's to give you information. The doctors you see are not going to have as much information as you could have. The neighbors you talk to, people in your church, people in your community, your parents, your siblings, you can be better informed than all of them, really by not doing a whole lot of research, but hopefully you will do a lot and you get very well informed. So we're going to talk about these different things, and we're going to start off with just ingredients. At the end, we're going to talk about choices. I'm going to give you some different, what your choices are and how you can support each one. Not going to tell you what to do, not going to tell you what not to do. Going to simply say, this is the information, now you make an informed decision. My wife and I made an informed decision on our 6 children. We've given advice to our children that do have children. There's 12 grandchildren so far. And they've had to make their own decisions, and they've not all been the same. So everybody gets to make their own decision, but do it because you have the information, not because you've been told by someone you have to do this, you've been trapped in a fear-based situation. That's not good. We want you to make an informed decision and feel good about it. All right. First thing I'm going to do is just take a brief look. I looked literally at the CDC website. I said, I want to know what the CDC says are in the vaccines. And this is from the CDC website. It's called Vaccine Excipient Summary. I'm just going to hit a few of them instead of going over all of them. But I thought I'd hit some of the more usual ones. All right. DPT. That's a really common one. It's caused a lot of challenges. 2 things in that, or several things. Aluminum, formaldehyde. I don't think I want either one of those in me or my children. Phenolxylphenol, this thing here, whatever that is. It's a German site, known to also be carcinogenic. Polysorbate 80 is an emulsifier. I'm going to talk about that later. It helps be an agent for either water or oil-based entity, liquid, to get into the body. We're going to talk about the blood-brain barrier a little later. Dr. Milevsky is going to talk about that. Hepatitis B, given at birth, day 1, and it is specifically to help protect people that have had unprotected sex or sharing needles. So your baby hasn't done that, and if you as a parent haven't done that, you do not need Hep B at birth for your baby. It does have aluminum, neomycin sulfate, yeast DNA, formaldehyde, flu. That's a biggie, and that's where we enter the word thimerosal. Interestingly enough, the CDC website and other websites say it's really not mercury, but I did take chemistry, and Hg is the symbol for mercury. So there it is. The rest of that, carbon-based hydrogen, mercury, Na, and O2, that's the compound for this thimerosal. Okay, talk just about a couple more. MMR, fetal bovine serum, W1 human diploid lung fibroblast for aborted fetuses, varicella, which is chickenpox, which I think is the really ridiculous vaccine. I am telling you my opinion on that one in particular, because when I was a kid, I got chickenpox. We had a chickenpox party. When my kids got chickenpox, we let them be around other kids in a healthy environment. Anyway, has MSG. It's in a lot of the other vaccines, by the way. Diploid tissue, fetal bovine serum, sodium phosphate. Okay, all kinds of stuff. You make a decision whether you think that's a good thing to put into your body or your child's body or not. So VaxCal.org, I do want you to write this down. Anyone that does want the information about how to log in, you just need to do a comment or contact our office directly. Online source to show choices in vaccines for your child. You can take the age, weight, and you can determine what that individual has for, that the options are for vaccines, because there's different vaccine companies. So therefore it tells you based on what your child's age and size is, weight is, what it would be at any age. You can do 2 months, 2 years, 5 years. Okay, I'm going to attempt to do something. We'll see how this goes. I'm going to get out of this PowerPoint presentation for a moment. And I'm going to go directly to, this is what it is. So, I happen to choose Vaccines for Jimmy. I made somebody up. He's 2 years old. This would be what the vaccine summary would be. 9 doses, 9 vaccines, and 3 shots containing multiple doses of 18 ingredients. So that's the top of the page, and if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, it actually says what is in you can go to each one. So I'll go to the Dtap one, and it then says what the ingredients are. So, that phenoxyethanol, aluminum, ammonium sulfate, bovine, casein, formaldehyde. So it tells you how much and the micrograms of each one. This is a particular one for Dtap, Daptocil, and Infinrix. So the 2 options there. So that's the Dtap one. You can go down to again hepatitis B. We already went over that. So this is how you can look this up. It's VaxCal.org. And again, we will give you the ingredients for that. I mean, how to get on that, how to log on. Okay, I'm going to jump directly to a testimony by Dr. Lawrence Milevsky, New York pediatrician on vaccination. Talks about how missing studies are that we say that we have and that are available, but seem not to be. So we're going to go full screen here. And this is what we're going to do for the next 10 minutes. So here we go.
My name is Dr. Lawrence Milevsky. I'm a pediatrician, originally trained at NYU School of Medicine, graduated in 1987, finished my residency at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York in 1990, and did a fellowship at the Bellevue Hospital in the outpatient department. The first 9 years of my career were spent in ERs, running an intensive care unit, working in a neonatal intensive care unit, working inpatient in the hospital, working in a clinic, and then eventually having a private practice. In 1983, when I started medical school, I was taught vaccines were safe and they were effective and give them. But I was not taught about any of the science around their safety or any of the studies around how safety were done. And it wasn't until 1998 that a mother came up to me and said, "Dr. Larry, did you know that there's mercury in vaccines?" And I said, "No, I did not." And as a medical student, I was trained to critically think. If you see an observation, you go after it and try and figure out if there's a question to ask. So instead of just ignoring it, I looked further into the vaccine ingredients. And I found that there were a number of vaccine ingredients that in animal studies were proven to be very dangerous to animals. And I didn't understand why these same ingredients were actually in vaccines. I was starting to hear stories from parents, not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of stories from parents who took a very healthy child into their doctor's office and then found that their child lost much of their health, whether it was their speech, whether it was seizures, whether it was death, whether it was asthma, allergies, eczema, whether it was autism, whether it was learning disabilities, whether it was inflammatory bowel disease, autoimmune diseases. And every one of those parents were told it had nothing to do with the vaccine. Every single one. And this continues today. But yet, when I look at the ingredients that are in the vaccines, I have the science to actually explain how these medical problems could be happening in these children. Today, one child in 5 is learning disabled. In 1976, it was 1 in 17. 1 in 6 under age 8, 1 in 2 adolescents, and 1 in 4 young adults is diagnosed with a mental, behavioral, or emotional disorder. 1 in 20 children under the age of 5 have seizures. 1 child in 40 develops autism. The number of cases of children and adults with autoimmune diseases is rising exponentially. It's one of the highest rising diseases in this country. And the vaccine ingredients, if you are willing to look at them and understand how they work when they're injected into the body, can be seen to be responsible for every single one of these cases. So what are these ingredients? Well, when I was in medical school, we were taught that the body has something called the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is like Fort Knox to the brain. Elements of the bloodstream cannot get into the brain. And those elements include drugs, viruses, and bacteria, among other things that are in the blood. Drug companies were very concerned about being able to develop drugs to get the drugs into the brain. And so they used something called a nanoparticle. Nanoparticle, very small particle, bound to the drug. And they found that if they could put a nanoparticle onto a drug, they could get that drug to go into the brain. And it shows in animal studies that they were able to do this. They then were able to take an emulsifier, which is something that's good with water and fat. It can dissolve in both. And if they added the emulsifier to the nanoparticle bound to the drug, they could increase drug entry into the brain 20-fold. This is right out of animal studies that I've found. So you have a drug, you have a nanoparticle, and you have this emulsifier. The vaccines are constructed the same way. You have the vaccine viruses and bacteria that are bound to a nanoparticle called aluminum. And that aluminum is a nanoparticle. And by definition, a nanoparticle has the potential to enter the brain. Most vaccines also contain polysorbate 80 or sorbitol. Both of those compounds are emulsifiers. Emulsifiers bind very tightly to the nanoparticle aluminum, which is bound very tightly to the vaccine antigens. This raises a question. If the vaccine model is the same model as the model that the drug companies are using to enhance the delivery of drugs into the brain, is it possible that vaccine ingredients are making their way into the brain of our children that could explain why so many parents are watching their kids deteriorate after vaccinations, even though the doctors, the media, and the government say absolutely no connection, even though the science suggests that there is. You cannot find a single study in the literature that addresses whether the injection of aluminum into the body penetrates the brain, whether any vaccine ingredients enter the brain, and whether polysorbate 80 enhances the delivery of any of those ingredients into the brain. And when I could not find those studies, I was concerned. Because I'm told, you're told, vaccines are evaluated and very, very distinctly tested for safety. But yet, you cannot find a study that says, does aluminum get into the brain of children? Does aluminum take other vaccine ingredients into the brain that don't belong in the brain? Because when ingredients get across the blood-brain barrier that don't belong in the brain, they cause inflammation. And inflammation is what we see in 1 in 5 children with learning disabilities and 1 in 40 children with autism. And we haven't, all you have to do is ask the guidance counselors, And if you get honest pediatricians who are telling you what they're seeing in their practice, they're seeing kids one after another with more and more brain disorders. Now, as a medical doctor who was taught to think and then went into the literature and said, are proper science studies done, safety studies, where you take a vaccine and you inject it into 100 kids, and then you give 100 kids a saline placebo, meaning it's inert. No study exists to actually evaluate the safety of a vaccine compared to a placebo group. None. When vaccines are studied, the maximum amount of days that vaccines are studied are up to 10 days to 2 weeks. And unfortunately, the vaccine manufacturers pre-select what side effects they will allow to be associated with the vaccines. So if a child has a vaccine reaction that is associated with the vaccine manufacturers will decide whether or not it should or should not be associated with the vaccine. And the public knows this, and they're learning it more and more. So if your child develops seizures 5 months after a vaccine, your child is told by the doctor it had nothing to do with the vaccine. But that's not true, because there are no studies to prove it. There's opinion, but there's never been a study really addressing whether a vaccination at 2 months, or even 9 hours of age, could be related to an event that happened months or even years later. And yet, we have some of the sickest children in our country. In New York, we lost the religious exemption on June 13th because the unvaccinated children with a religious exemption were blamed for a measles outbreak. When I met with representatives in New York, I told them that there is no study to prove that unvaccinated children have ever been proven to start an epidemic. And he was surprised. And he said, I will vote against removing a religious exemption if I can't find a study. Like you said, he could not find a study, but he voted to repeal the exemption anyway. Because there are no studies. There are no studies proving that unvaccinated children are responsible. There's consensus. And here's why there's consensus.
Okay, so I thought that was excellent. We're now going to take we're going to go back to the PowerPoint, and we're going to look at this one. Okay, so we are going to now take a look here from what we were looking at before. So I talked about VaxCal, we already did that, so now we're going to go to the next slide. We just talked about Dr. Lawrence Milevsky and the points that he made there, and I just think that it was an excellent presentation and didn't see any way that I could improve on that. So he gave a full 30 minutes, talked about ingredients in vaccines, he talked about the blood-brain barrier, talked about nanoparticles and emulsifiers, no safety studies done on vaccinations at all, and they only watched reactions for officially for 2 weeks. No studies proving that unvaccinated children can start an epidemic. So we get now to what are you going to do about it? What are your choices? Thought I'd just take a little pause here. I didn't put this in any of the slides, but a man by the name of Alan Phillips is an advocate for vaccination rights. And he tells a story. I actually met with him in North Carolina probably back in the early 2000s. My oldest daughter was living there at the time, and I heard about him, and he lived nearby, so I went and met him. We went to a coffee shop together and shared about an hour. And his story, and I just found this from G-Val, his name is Alan Phillips. Anyway, he tells a story that he had his first child. He went into the doctor's office, and was asked to, that day was supposed to be the day for vaccinations for his son. And he was given a waiver, a little form to sign and say, we want you to sign this form before we'll give you the vaccination. It was basically, it was stating that, he said that actually the reactions, clinical literature was a contradiction. My son's chance of an adverse reaction to the DPT vaccine were 1 in 1,700. While his chances of dying from pertussis each year was 1 in several million. So he said, I don't want to do that today, and he after that became very informed. My personal story is that I went to chiropractic school before we had any children. I didn't know there was a vaccine debate, didn't know there was any issue, didn't know that there was should I get the vaccine or should I not get the vaccine? Should I delay didn't know any of that. As a child, I had been given vaccinations by my parents. I served an LDS mission, was required to get vaccinations, had a little bit of a reaction, but figured that was just normal. But luckily, before we had any children, I found out there was a very huge debate between getting them, not getting them, doing something in between. So my story was, before I had our first child, I got informed the best I could. Way back in the late 1970s, there was not the immediate access of Google and all the online research that's available. Some of it good, some of it not so good, obviously. But that was where I had to therefore make a decision. So basically the choices are, do you get a vaccination and hope that your child does not have a reaction to it? Do you choose to delay vaccinations and to get them later on? Japan, actually, interestingly enough, went from having babies be vaccinated to waiting until they were 2 years old and had a major decline in reactions to vaccinations. Or do you get no vaccinations at all? And then do you risk getting the disease if, in fact, vaccines work at all? That's a separate subject. I will say this. Both RFK Jr. and Robert De Niro offered $100,000 to anybody that could prove the efficacy of vaccines, and nobody took them up on the offer. 100 grand is a pretty good amount of money. There's been other studies as well that, like Dr. Milevsky said, there's no study showing that they are not harmful. There was a study done comparing over 600 homeschool children that had not been vaccinated and comparing their health to those that had been. Very interesting study that came out within the last decade. I'd recommend you look at that as well. Okay, so if you choose to get vaccinated, if you choose to vaccinate your children, you can go to the NVIC website, National Vaccine Information Center. I'll just show you what that looks like as well real quick. So we're going to get out of this and we're going to go right here. NVIC website. It says here's the 8 questions. Is my child sick right now? Has he had a reaction before? Do I know the risks of the particular disease versus the risk of the vaccine and how I feel about that? Would I rather that my child actually get chickenpox or measles, or would I rather them have the adverse effects of the vaccine? One thing it doesn't say, you can actually find out the vaccine manufacturer's name, you can find out the lot number, you can find out what the ingredients are like I showed you before. So this is a great resource, nvic.org. We're going to make these available to you as well afterwards. And I thought I'd just go to this real quick. National Vaccine, again, the same website, and it says which states allow different exemptions. So this is the part that if you choose not to get a vaccine, okay, we happen to be in the state of Utah, which the yellow does mean you can do a philosophical objection. There's only 12 states now that do that. My beloved state of Maine, where I grew up and raised my kids for 20 years, as of next year, next fall, they're taking away the religious or the philosophical objection. Right now in the state of Utah, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Right now in the state of Utah, you can philosophically object. You can say, I don't want to do that. I don't feel good about that. I did my research. This is the decision I came up with. You can go online and there's a form you need to fill out, and you need to watch a short video that as of last year was a requirement in the state of Utah. But nonetheless, you still have that right to not do that. Finally, the last slide. I'm just going to say all my research pointed me to make a decision about my children. Everybody has to make their own decision. I did participate in a 5-doctor panel that I thought was very interesting. It was several years ago. There was an naturopath, 2 osteopaths, and 2 MD, and 1 MD and myself. The 1 DO and myself were way more informed than everybody else. The naturopath was a woman who didn't say a word. She said she was too nervous to say anything. The MD basically just said, I'm just doing what the American Pediatric Association tells me to do. The 2 DOs had a varied opinion. One was delay them, one was do very, very few of them, and the other one was to make sure that the parent was informed before doing them. And of course, then I had the more conservative view of telling people to be informed and then making a decision. And I think that if there was a way to be able to help a child be immune from all those diseases without the nasty ingredients, I'd take a look at that. But that's not available right now. So therefore, you have to either trust the body's ability to fight diseases and the innate intelligence within the body and not get vaccinated, or trust the medical world and say, I guess I really should get this vaccine for my kids. I'm going to do it on my terms, but I feel like I should do that. And then there are ways to help fortify your child if you feel like that's the right decision. So, it is a big deal. It is a big question. Please do not give in to the fear. Do not give in to the propaganda out there on either side. And I'm willing to admit that it's on either side. But find out for yourself and say, what really makes sense for my child? What really makes sense in our family, in our circumstance, where we live, in North America, wherever else you live in the world? Make a decision on what you should do. I went to Africa. I did take an anti-malarial pill. I don't take one here in the United States. I avoided doing other things that were suggested because I believed in the body's innate ability to heal itself. But that's me, and that's where I stand. So I invite you to take a look. I hope this has been helpful. Please ask for additional questions or comments. We're willing to give you the VaxCal information of how to log in. NVIC is another great resource. And look at the CDC website and see what they say. A lot of propaganda there, but look and see what they say. Look at the ingredients, get informed, and I hope that you make a decision you can feel good about and that you can protect your child the best you can. Thanks for listening.